Okay, so welcome to the Marathon of Miracles podcast. I have a very, very special first guest, um, and I'm very, very grateful for his presence. Um, I came across one of his books a few years ago, maybe 7 years ago, when I was in a very low period of my life, and a very good friend of mine said that I think you need to read this book. And when he said the name of the book to begin with, I had a bit of a reaction, an internal reaction. The name of the book was Conversations with God, and I'm not sure I wanted to necessarily hear from God in that moment. And I listened to him and I started reading it. And after the first few pages, it just felt that everything is right in the world again. It felt like so much truth. It felt like I get it, like all is well. Although I wasn't necessarily clear on a few of the answers, but it was amazing what shift produced for me. So I have been recommending the book ever since, and from time to time I take it and I reread some of the dialogues, and that's how I got to have Neale here with us as my first guest. And I'm going to tell you a bit about Neale. Neale Donald Walsch has written 40 books on contemporary spirituality and its practical application in everyday life, including the latest book called God Talk, Experiences of Humanity's Connection with the Higher Power. It's a book that's part of the Common Sentience series. And Neale is also the best-selling author, as I said, of Conversations with God series. It's 9 dialogue books, and 7 of them have made the New York Times best-selling list. The book number 1 remained on the list for 134 weeks, and these titles have been translated into 37 languages. And they have been read by millions of people and transformed millions of lives. So I'm very, very happy and very honored to have Neale with me tonight. Neale, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sabina, for inviting me. It's lovely to join you for this conversation. Tell me how I may be of service to you.
Sure. Neale, I want us to speak a bit about the book. And God Talk is your 40th book. So it would be good to understand, how is God Talk different and special from the previous books?
Well, it's the only book, number one, that I was ever asked to write by a publisher. That's what makes it different at the beginning, because most authors, when they write a book, they sit down, they write a book, and then they try to find a publisher who will put it out. And that's what it was for me for my first 39 books. But in this case, my telephone rang, and it was a publisher asking me if I would be willing to write a book for them. And I said, sure, what did you have in mind? And they asked me if I would write a book about how people could have their own experience of conversations with God. So I did my best. I wrote, my ideas down and sent it to them, and they published it. What makes the book different from other books that I've written is that it gives 6 actual steps that one could take to have their own conversation with God. It also includes interesting stories from other people, because the publisher had an idea. The publisher thought we should ask other people around the world whether they have ever had an experience of divine intervention in their life, just to see if, or is Neale the only one, the only regular person who's had a conversation with God. And they said they received hundreds of emails from people saying that they had also had their own intervention experience. So they put those 7 or 8 of those stories in the book because they wanted to prove that it's not just about this one man, Neale Donald Walsch, but people all over the world are having conversations with God all the time. They're simply calling it something else. They don't call it conversations with God. They may call it women's intuition or an epiphany or a sudden insight, or they might call it a brilliant idea. But, I simply called it what it felt like to me. It felt like conversations with God. But what makes the book different from the other books is that it includes those stories from other people, and it includes those 6 steps that I mentioned earlier about how I had my own conversation with God and how people could possibly have their own experience as well. There's no guarantee, of course, but it was an opportunity to share with people how I came to have the experience that I had. So that's what makes it different from all of the other books that I have been blessed to have an opportunity to write.
Thank you, Neale. So you're saying anyone can talk to God, and
Yes, everyone is. Everyone is talking to God all the time. As I said, they're simply calling it something else.
okay.
Nobody, the average person doesn't say, I had a conversation with God this morning, and he told me, because they don't want to be ridiculed. People don't want to be marginalized or made wrong or laughed at. So they don't say they had a conversation with God. As I indicated a while ago, they simply call it something else. I had a brilliant idea, or suddenly something came to me. I was in the shower and I had this incredible insight, whatever. So they use all kinds of different words to describe the same experience that I call conversations with God.
And Neale, is this a two-way communication? Is God listening?
Yes, of course. God is listening to all of us all the time because God does not exist somewhere out there high in the sky. My understanding is that God exists deep within every sentient being in the cosmos, that we are all individuations of the divine. And because God exists, each of us is a part of God. We're not God, of course. We're like a wave on the ocean. Each of us is a part of God. And because God exists within each of us, God, of course, is listening to every thought, every idea, every word, every request, everything we think and say. The answer is yes. God is listening to us always and in all ways. Because again, I want to make the point that we are kind of like, each of us is like a wave on the ocean. The wave is not something other than the ocean. It's the ocean, but it's just an individual arising, an individual expression of the ocean. And when the expression is complete, the wave recedes back into the ocean from which it came. So I think that we are all waves on the ocean of divinity. That's an analogy that I would use to describe who and what we are.
That's beautifully described. Wonderful. So in this book, you're saying there are stories shared, real, true stories of some people, including yours. Why do you think it's important to to share these stories, these experiences of talking to God?
So that people are convinced that this is a common experience of all of us. And so that people, it's important so that people stop denying, number one, that there is a God. Number two, that God is communicating with us all the time in 100 different ways across 1,000 moments in an endless number of lifetimes. So that's the reason why it's important.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you like to share one of the stories in the book?
No, what I don't do is I don't share the stories in the book because I don't want to preempt, the stories that I can describe there. There's a woman who was told that her health condition would be healed. She had a serious health problem. There's a story in there about a scientist who had a conversation with God that dramatically changed his life. There's a story in the book about a teacher who received a divine message to help her connect with her students in school, and several other stories as well. But without getting into the details, I think each of the stories is about an ordinary human being who had a direct intervention with the divine. So they're exciting and wonderful stories, and I'm sure people will enjoy reading them.
I love the story with the teacher, and I was thinking if he was to pick one, I would have picked that one. So it's interesting.
Nice.
That one. Um, Amazing. Neale, you mentioned the six steps um, in how can we talk to God, and step number 3, if I'm not mistaken, describes the willingness. Can you maybe explain a bit what does that mean?
Well, the 6 steps are possibility, worthiness, willingness, wakefulness, acceptance, and discernment. First, we have to agree that it's possible to even have a conversation with God. If we don't think it's possible, then it's not going to happen. I mean, it will happen, but we will call it something else. We will dismiss it. We'll reject it. Then we have to agree that we are worthy to have an actual conversation with God. That God doesn't just talk to the Pope, or the head ulama, or the chief rabbi. That God talks to all sorts of people, not just people with so-called sacred credentials. Then we get to where you are, step number 3, willingness. We have to be willing to accept the fact that we are actually having conversations with God. Because, Sabina, most of the world's religions and most of the world's cultures tell us that such a thing is not possible. In fact, many of the world's religions say that if we claim that God is talking directly to us, that we are a blasphemer, we are a heretic, we are an apostate, we are saying, things that are not true. So religions tell us not to go around saying to people that God is talking to me every day. So we have to be willing to overcome the cultural bias against the idea that we're having conversations with God. And that's an act of courage. It takes courage. It takes bravery for us to say that God is talking to me all the time. And that's why I say that step 3 is very important. We must be willing to coin a phrase, to go against the grain, to say something that we know ahead of time most people will disagree with. Oh, you didn't have a conversation with God. Go on. Do you really think you had a conversation with God? So if we have willingness to say, yes, I did.
Yeah, it does take courage. Sometimes people feel they'll be judged, they'll be called crazy.
Yes.
what you said about in many religions being a blasphemy, I remember you mentioned as well in the book that we're, as humanity, a young species, and it was very, very interesting to see. And the fourth step is wakefulness, and how you were saying how many people prefer to actually be walk sleeping.
Sleepwalkers.
Yes. Why do you think is that, and how can we change that? Um,
Well, I think the why I just explained the why people would rather be sleepwalkers is that they don't want to be made fun of. They don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to be made wrong. They don't want to be called crazy. So they just, and many people, Sabina, billions of people don't even think there is a God. They don't even believe in God. They think it's all something that's just a fairy tale. So we have to, that's the reason that people like to be sleepwalkers, because then they don't have to confront the disagreement or the arguments that other people have with regard to the existence of a God and the possibility that God not only exists, but will talk directly to every human being throughout all of their lives. So wakefulness means stay awake. Stay awake. Don't be walking in your sleep. Don't let the message go in one ear and out the other. Stay awake. Watch what's happening in your life. Listen to the clues, the hints that you are getting. They sometimes come in the form of feelings or visions, ideas, not just dialogue. So God's communications come to us in 100 different ways across 1,000 moments in every one of our lifetimes. That's my understanding and that's my experience.
and Neil, how can we distinguish these messages? One of the steps is also discernment. The mind can also play tricks, and many people start saying, "Oh, it's just the mind," or it's not the actual truth. How can we distinguish these messages that come maybe from the mind to the ones that speak?
Well, the messages that come from the divine never include fear of any kind. They are messages of joy, freedom, and love. So if the message that we are receiving is a message of joy, freedom, and love, we can be sure it's a message from God. But if it's a message of fear, like, oh, be careful, watch out, you could get hurt, don't do that, don't do that. Or if it's a message of lack of freedom, then it's probably not a message from God. But God's messages have to do with the experience of the human soul, not simply the experiences of the human body. And that's the difference between the messages. God's messages refer to and relate to the soul, the spirit of us, and not simply my body and my mind. So that's how I tell the difference. If I'm walking down the street and I'm reaching into my pocket for my car keys, and I pull my keys out of my pocket, but then a $5 bill, a 10-pound note falls out of my pocket on the sidewalk, it's a sign. It's a sign from God. I'm supposed to take all the money out of my pocket and throw it on the ground. No, 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 no. Don't confuse simple accidents as so, but just, use common sense. Your heart will tell you when the message you've received, when the event that is occurring, when the thoughts that go through your mind, when the visions that occur to you, your heart will tell you when they're true and when they're coming from the divine. So listen to your heart.
Made me think of the "Listen to Your Heart." Beautiful song. Yes. You spoke about the soul, and I know you say about the soul's agenda. So if we listen to the heart and we follow the soul's agenda, you described it very nicely. That you have to begin something, but you also have to take it to completion. And maybe you can explain a bit, what does completion mean?
Completion means doing what you have declared and decided that you want to experience. It means not stopping in the middle. But it shouldn't be felt like a burden. It should always be felt like a joy. If it feels like a burden, don't do it. I try not to do anything that feels like a burden. I only do those things that bring me happiness, peace, and joy. But when I make the decision to do something that brings me joy, I make a commitment to complete the choice that I made, to complete whatever it is that I began.
I see. And if Neil, if some people that are maybe watching and they are in, I don't know, in some environments where they don't necessarily feel the joy, such as in a job or a relationship that doesn't bring them joy. Many people say, well, I have to do it because, well, it's life and I have to earn something for my family. Or what would you say? What would you
I would say to people what Conversations with God said to me. God said to me, Neil, nobody does anything they don't want to do. They simply have a good reason for wanting to do it. For instance, as an example, you said some people have jobs they don't like, but they stay there so they can support their family. Oh, so if their job helps them to do something they want to do, which is to support their family, then they should stop telling themselves that they're doing something they don't want to do. See, this is one thing that human beings do a lot. We do things that we say we don't want to do. Excuse me. We do things that we say we don't want to do, even though we're doing them because we have a very good reason for doing them. That helps us be the hero and the victim of our own story. I'm the hero and I'm the victim of my own story. I'm the victim because I got to do what I don't want to do, but I'm the hero because I do it anyway. You know, that's a very childish, immature way to go through life. And what God said to me was, Neil, don't do anything you don't want to do. But if you do something because you have a very good reason for doing it, then bless the fact that you're able to do it and be joyful in completion of what you're doing. And don't resent doing what you obviously want to do. And if you don't want to do it, then don't do it. But don't lie to yourself and do something that you want to do for perfectly good reasons, and then tell yourself that you had no choice. There's no such thing as no choice. You have free choice all the time. Do you know how many people do not support their families and fail to support their families because they didn't want to? They didn't. I can't tell you the number of people who do that. So if you're one of those people who've chosen to support your family, even if your job is not the most joyful thing of your life, then allow yourself to realize that you're doing something that you have chosen to do. And every act is an act of self-creation. Everything we do tells the world who we are. I am a person who has chosen to support my family, even if I have to do something for a living that is not my favorite thing in the world.
Taking responsibility for your life can feel also great, and also like such a wake-up call when you realize you are the only one responsible.
Yes, it's called responsibility, the ability to respond to the invitations of life. Responsibility. And when I have the ability to respond with the highest version of who I am, such as supporting my family, to use a simple example, when I move into that place, then I am completing the agenda of the soul. Because the agenda of the soul is to demonstrate the highest version of who I am in every moment of life.
That's beautiful. How can we do that, Neale? How can we act as the highest form of self?
By simply asking ourselves what I call life's magic question. Whenever anything is occurring in my life, I simply look into the event, whether it's a conversation I'm having with somebody, an argument that's occurring, a job that's being offered to me, whatever it might be. I ask myself life's magic question. What does this have to do with the agenda of my soul? And you know what, Sabina, every time I ask myself that question, the answer comes to me immediately. What does this have to do with the agenda of my soul? And that's how I shift into an expression of the grandest version of who I really am.
I love that question. Can I maybe ask that? What is in this moment? I don't know this. How was your decision to maybe come and join this tonight? What is doing for the agenda of your soul?
The agenda of my soul is to share with everyone whose life I touch the most important and wonderful messages that have been given to me in my conversations with God. So how this moment serves that agenda, it's giving me a chance to share the messages that I was offered to share. And that's the agenda of my soul. There's nothing that my soul wants to do more than simply share the messages of conversations with God. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to do so on this program.
Wow. In you're saying about sharing the message, and in God Talk, you also say about how important it is to start talking about God. And I want to ask why is it important?
Because human beings have a belief about God, that is, many do, not everyone, but many do, that damages our ability to create the world as we want to create it. Many people believe that God is loving, for sure, but also judging, condemning, and punishing. And because we believe that God acts that way with us, we act that way with others. We judge, condemn, and punish others as well. And we do it with impunity because we say if it's good enough for God, it's good enough for us. So what we believe about God has a direct impact on how we interact with other human beings. That's why it's important to talk about God. I think we have come to a place where we have to stop behaving the way we have been behaving as a species. Sabina, do you know we've had armed conflict on this planet for all but 2% of recorded history? We're always fighting with each other, and we're killing each other, and we're damaging our planet in 1,000 different ways because of our belief in a God who damages and hurts and destroys us if we don't do what God says we're supposed to do. So we do the same thing to others who don't do what we tell them that we require them to do. It could be your spouse, could be your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or it could be another country, another whole country that's doing something that we don't want them to do. And so we start a war over it. And we've been doing that, as I said, for most of recorded history. So when we change our idea about what God wants and what God does, then we have an opportunity to change our behaviors with regard to what we desire and how we respond when we don't get what we desire. And that's why it's important to talk about God, because I think we have a wrong idea of who God is and of who we are.
I'll share a small story about this. When I was about 17, we went through a situation in my family.
This is last week, when you were 17 last week?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because you look like you're around 18 now. Okay, so what happened last week?
Well, last week, yeah, we went through a situation, and sometimes, unfortunately, people only turn to God when there's that sort of desperation and you don't know where else to turn. And we learned religion in school, so we had some idea of God, but our parents, our generation, the generation of our parents didn't. So mom came to me and she said, teach me religion. And I said, I kind of laughed and I said, well, it doesn't really work like that. But I said, let's see. She started going to church, and she started feeling a bit more peace. But soon enough, she came to me and she said, I don't understand this God because he's very judgmental and very vengeful. And she said, I don't understand, where's the love. And last week, with my mind of 17, I said, religion is just created by humans, so just take whatever sounds like truth to you. But it was one of the first times when I realized that there's not a choice necessarily being given through so many religions. They present this definition that hasn't been changed, and you speak quite a bit about this, about the new definition of God, and it would be lovely if you would maybe tell us a bit about that.
Well, first of all, thank you for having the courage and the bravery and the spiritual insight to share with your mother when you were 17 that people simply have an idea about God that may not be accurate, may not be totally true. Now, with regard to your question, I wrote a book called The God Solution. And in the book called The God Solution, I offer a brand new definition of God. I say that the world's problems would be solved if we simply came up with a new definition of God, a two-word definition. In English, 2 words: pure love. Now, when I say this in front of an audience, Sabina, at a lecture, somebody stands up in the back of the room and says, "Oh, Mr. Walsch, come on. Is that the big revelation that God is love? We've been listening to you for 20 minutes for you to tell us that God is love." And I have to say to my friend, whoa, 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 relax. That's not what I said. I said God is pure love. Now my friend will say, okay, what's the difference? The difference is that pure love needs, expects, requires, and demands nothing in return. Dare we believe in a God who demands nothing in return for the love that God showers upon us every day? We can't even love the person on the pillow next to us that way. Much less can we believe in a God who loves us in that way. But in the book, The God Solution, we talk extensively how the world would change and how each of our individual lives would be different, dramatically improved, if we simply embrace the notion that God is pure love, and so are we. By the way, anyone who wants a copy of that book, an electronic copy, not a hard copy, but a digital copy, I will send it to them at no cost, free. Just send me an email at nealdonaldwalsh.com and say, Neale, please send me a digital copy of The God Solution. And I'll send it to you just for the reading and see what you think of it. So that's what I think is the solution to humanity's biggest problem: to decide that God is pure love and that we are pure love. And what would we think, say, and do in every moment of our life if we really thought that who we are is pure love? I could, of course, be wrong about all of this, but I don't think so.
Neale, if we are pure love, and you were giving the pillow example, in our day-to-day life, how can we integrate that? How can we love
By
someone?
simply doing and saying what pure love would do and say in response to every event that occurs. It's really quite simple. Whatever event occurs, simply responding with pure love, needing, requiring, and demanding nothing in return. It's really quite simple. Or to put it as, there was a guy who was walking around the planet here about 2,000 years ago, and he put it really simply. He said, "Do unto others as you would have it done unto you." Treat everyone else the way you want to be treated. It's really quite simple. Let me ask you, Sabina, have you ever made a mistake in your life?
For sure.
You have?
Numerous.
Have you ever said something that was maybe not totally kind to
Yes,
another person?
absolutely.
See now how you would like to be treated after you did that is how we would treat someone else when they are unkind to us. It's really quite simple.
Yeah. I can see that. I'm wondering if it's possible to not have demands at all from the people around.
Of course it is, because you don't need anything to be totally happy. We only think that we need things, but we don't really need anything to be totally happy. The soul, the spirit of you, needs nothing to be totally and completely happy. So yes, it is possible to have no demands on anyone, to just allow all the other people in your life to walk the path of their soul in the way that is serving them. And bless them. It goes even further than that, not just your friends. This guy that was walking around here 2,000 years ago that I just mentioned a minute ago, he said something else that was very interesting. You know what he said? Bless, bless, bless your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And be kind to those who are unkind to you. And when a man slaps you on the right cheek, turn and offer him your left. And when a man steals your coat, give him your shirt as well. And when a man demands that you walk 1 mile with him, go with him too. It's really quite simple, Sabina. It's really quite simple.
I was thinking, Neil, how does that work with opinions? You are mentioning that, we get to kill each other because we disagree. And does it mean that we are not entitled to have opinions or
Of
to,
course it doesn't. You know better than that. You know the answer to that question even before you asked it.
yeah,
Of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't mean that we're not supposed to have an opinion. But what we have to do is find a way to disagree agreeably. That's what I put on my bathroom mirror. Neale, disagree agreeably. And of course, it doesn't mean we can't have opinions, but differences do not have to produce divisions. Contrasts do not have to produce conflicts. It's not the same thing. There are even some differences between you and me. If you had no clothes on, I would probably notice a few differences between you and me. And as the French say, vive la différence. So celebrate the differences between us. And don't require everyone to agree with you, with everything you say. However, I should make it clear that if you, Sabina, disagree with what I'm saying right now, you're going to be in big trouble tomorrow. Because I will send a car around to your house and you will wish you never disagreed with the thing I said.
understood.
So be very careful. what you say. You better agree with me.
The car sounds good. No problem. Amazing. Thank you, Neil. Yes, that makes total sense. Um, Neil, you were talking about we were saying this book, The God Talk, is part of the Common Sentient series, and I was wondering if you can tell us a bit about it. Why did you decide to write a book that's part of this series?
Well, the series is not a book that I have not created a series. That's a series that the publisher is putting out by other authors. So the Common Sentient series is a series of books, and the publisher said, would you write one book in that series? I said, sure. So I agreed, and I wrote the book. Because I wanted to get the word out there, because it served the agenda of my soul. And if I am asked to do something that serves the agenda of my soul, my answer will always be yes.
Um, Neil, God talk. We spoke a bit earlier about why is it important to speak about God, and now we also spoke about how to have an agreeable opinion
This an agreeable disagreement.
disagreement. I'm kind of adding these two together, and you were saying how people should have this conversation at the maybe dinner table, or like maybe what are a few of the starters of these conversations, or how can we make them more natural, more common?
Well, of course, there's no one size fits all answer to your question. There's no answer I can give you that works for everybody in every moment of their life. So, but when we decide to, explore the topic of God in as gentle and loving a way as we can, without trying to proselytize, without trying to convince anyone of anything, but just as an intellectual discussion, as an intellectual excursion, as an exploration of ideas. When we decide that that's something that we would enjoy doing, often we discover that it's possible to bring up the topic in the normal flow of regular conversation with another person. So, I don't try to find ways to bring it up, unnaturally, abnormally, but, I often do look for ways that I can either bring up the topic of God or bring up something that God said to me in my conversations with God. And that allows me to open the whole exploration of how we are receiving messages from the divine all during our lives.
You were saying you sometimes bring up things from conversations with God, and the story of how you got to have these conversations is quite fascinating. And I'm thinking it would be helpful maybe for people to know, how was it for you the first time when you started, having this communication, and how long did it take to acknowledge it was an actual conversation with God, and how long it took you maybe to accept that it's a real conversation to God, and then to also have the courage that we were speaking about to share it in the world.
Well, it didn't take me any time at all to experience and to acknowledge that I was having a conversation with God. It began one night, it's 4:30 in the morning. I woke up very angry about my life because nothing was going right in my life. And so I just woke up at 4:30 in the morning, and I went out to the couch to the sofa in the living room, and there happened to be a yellow tablet, a yellow legal pad on the coffee table, and I started writing an angry letter just to get my energy out. So I wrote an angry letter to God. Dear God, what does it take to make life work? What have I done to deserve a life of such continuing struggle? And I said to God, tell me the rules. I'll play the game. Just tell me the rules. Give me the rule book. How does it go? And don't change the rules every other day, because there are 4,000 religions, each with their own set of rules. What's the rule? How does it work? And I was just, writing this angry letter to God. And then I received a thought, a voice. The voice was so real, I would have sworn it was actually in the room right behind me. But of course, I turned around, there was nobody there. I thought, great. Now I'm losing my mind. But the voice said, Neale, do you really want answers to all of these questions? Or are you just venting? And I said to God, yeah, I'm inventing. But if you've got answers, I'd sure as hell like to know what they are. And God said, you are sure as hell about a lot of things. But wouldn't you rather be sure as heaven? And I wrote down on the paper, okay, what's that supposed to mean? And then God gave me answers to all the questions I had asked, and to questions that I hadn't even dreamed existed. God invited me to ask other questions as well. And before I knew it, I was engaged in an ongoing dialogue that I called a conversation with God. And it didn't take me, a long time to accept for myself what it was, because that's exactly what it felt like. It took me like 20 minutes, not 20 days or 20 weeks or 20 years, but 20 minutes. I realized, oh my gosh, I've connected with the divine. And all people are connected with the divine. They simply don't find a way to acknowledge it. And then I was told in the dialogue, you will make of this one day a book. I was told right in the conversation. And I thought, oh, well, people will just think I'm doing it just to somehow, make money or to become well known. They'll think I'm doing it, for selfish reasons. And God said, stop worrying about yourself. Just write the book. Put everything that we are saying to each other in a book and see what happens. So I did. I wrote a book called, I didn't actually try to write a book. I simply continued to have the conversation, and all I did was take dictation. I was like a secretary taking dictation. I was simply writing down the answers that I was receiving in response to my questions that I was asking God. And I asked God questions about everything, about how to make a good living, right livelihood, about diet, exercise, sexuality, human relationships, everything. I asked about everything, money. I asked about everything that ever bothered me. And I got answers. And, because God said, you will make of this a book, I thought, okay. And I sent it to a publisher. I sent my notes just as I received the information. Sent it to a publisher. And I didn't even think they would publish it. Who's going to publish a book by a guy who says, hey, I'm talking to God? But the publishing company did put the book out. And it wound up selling 5 or 6 copies. Or maybe 5 or 6 million. 5 million copies. translated into 37 languages, read around the world. I'm not bragging, I'm just saying. That's just what happened. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you for sharing, you.
I've enjoyed sharing this time with you here today. Thank you for having me on the program.
My pleasure. It's truly a joy. Neale, I have a last few questions, and you mentioned heaven, and you mentioned in God's talk the kingdom of heaven. Um, what is the kingdom of heaven, and how can we reach it?
The kingdom of heaven is just a phrase. It's just a few words we use to describe life after physical death. It's the place that the soul goes to. And the soul experiences the spiritual realm. It's one of three realms in the kingdom of God: the physical realm, the realm of the spiritual, and the realm of pure being, all of which are described in the books, Conversations with God. So heaven is, and the beauty of heaven is whatever we want it to be. When we get to what people call the other side, when we get to the other side, we discover that we can create anything we want to create, any experience we want to have. That's heaven. And so we create glorious, wondrous, joyful, happy experiences. And then we come to clarity about how we would like to use our physical incarnations. And we come back to Earth over and over again in what are called reincarnations.
Like that, the other side, um, I wrote one of the most beautiful definitions of death. You are saying that is nothing but soul's change of address.
Yeah, the process of re-identification. Death is just a change of address. So we continue to exist. We continue to experience ourselves in our true identity. We're simply in a different place, a place where there is no time, no negativity, nothing but peace and joy and love.
How do you think we can do to accept this more, to take this as our truth and cope easier with life when someone dear passes away?
By simply living as a demonstration of who we really are. By simply demonstrating pure love, as I mentioned a moment ago, in response to every event or circumstance of our life. And if we do that over a period of time, we discover that life changes for us and it becomes peaceful and serene and joyful and feeling free and wonderful. That's been my experience.
Neale, I call this podcast Marathon of Miracles, which is actually thanks to you. We, we had this a conversation last year, and you encouraged me to write a book, and actually you came up with this name, A Marathon of Miracles. After I mentioned that my life in the last few years have been like a marathon of miracles, and I want to thank you for that, for opening this message and this topic, which I was telling you before this conversation that I felt afterwards it was a bit heavy for me to communicate further. But I wanted to ask you, you're mentioning quite a bit in your book about miracles, and I wanted to ask you what is a miracle? How can
There's no, here we go again, there's no one size fits all answer to the question. A miracle is different for every human being on the planet. And we may experience many, many miracles in our lives, not just one. But what is a miracle? It's whatever we say it is. But to be very general and loose in our definition, a miracle is an unexpected event, circumstance, or outcome in our life that produces blessing, joy, peace, and goodness beyond anything we could have imagined. For instance, Sabina, have you ever had a sexual experience in your life with another person? You have?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if the other person was having a sexual experience with you, to that other person, that would be a miracle. Because it would bring joy, happiness, beyond anything that another person could ever possibly imagine. So a miracle is an event that occurs in our life that produces joy and happiness beyond anything that we could possibly imagine.
I agree. It's not one answer, and I came to learn this as I was learning more about the topic and asking people, and it's interesting to see how people see it. Yeah. Thank you, Neale. Neale, any last message from you or from God that?
Well, I see that our time is up, so I just get one very fast message. When I asked God what would make life work, God said, Neale, remember this always. Life is not about you. It's about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. And when you understand that, and when you treat other people in the way you would want to be treated, then you suddenly experience a universal truth that all of life is about you for a very elegant reason. There's only one of us in the room. All things are one thing. There is only one thing, and all things are part of the one thing there is, called God. And that would be my closing statement. Thanks for having me on the program.
Thank you so much, Neale. Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing all the wisdom with us.
I'm glad we had a chance to spend some time together.
Thank you.